My name is Alex Stuckey. I'm an investigative reporter for the Houston Landing, which is a nonprofit digital news site that just opened up, isn't quite the right word, but opened up a couple months ago in the Houston area. But I have spent the past 4-ish years writing about the intersection of mental health and criminal justice in the state of Texas, previously for the Houston Chronicle. I am not as brave as William in naming everyone and getting their titles right. So I'm just going to send it down the line and you guys can introduce yourselves.
Sure. My name is Galan Merwanji. I'm the Director of Holistic Defense and the Social Work Supervisor with the Harris County Office of Manager Assigned Counsel.
Hi, and I'm Rocky Ramirez. I'm with Bexar County Manager Assigned Counsel. I'm the Law and Technology Resource Attorney.
My name is Ana Jimenez, and I am a managing attorney with the Regional Public Defender's Office for Capital Cases.
My name is Nora Picasso. I run My Padilla, which is a project by the Capital Area Private Defender Service, the managed appointed counsel here in Travis County.
Okay, so I want to talk about, start by talking about holistic defense. So, Galan, I know that is the focus of your office. So, can you first kind of explain what that is, what that entails, what that looks like?
Sure. So Bronx Defenders are the ones who pioneered holistic defense. And what it really, the gist of it is all about humanizing the process. And we do that by first making sure that we can get an interdisciplinary team. And what I mean by that is having social workers, civil attorneys, immigration attorneys, investigators, and other team members, IT, whatever it may look like for the team to ensure that we are providing good quality representation. Because what we are seeing is that clients, especially as our office works in misdemeanor cases, that clients have intersectional issues, which means they go beyond the legal case. And we want that to be resolved and addressed so that the client doesn't keep coming back into the criminal justice system. And the way you can do that is making sure that we have a team that works together. There is intercommunication, there is an understanding of the community resources that we can help address the underlying issues that bring our clients to the criminal legal system. It's how I like to say it.
So, can you give us some examples of what that looks like,
Sure.
and how you've seen it work?
So there are 2 or 3 ways. One is like on the direct case itself. So like providing mitigation report. And what I mean is providing the court, the prosecutor, and other stakeholders information beyond what they see on their charging instrument. And we do that by interviewing the client, doing a social history investigation, and bringing light to the client's life and what could have led to the case, which sometimes we get to know about clients' mental health situation, substance use issues, employment, whatever that may be, that could have directly or indirectly related to the criminal's legal interaction that they had. On the other hand, we also work around by connecting clients to resources in the community so that they don't have to come back, such as homelessness. So we want to make sure that we are connecting clients with housing case managers. As Anthony Graves just said about having clients who have experience with the legal system being introduced into the teamship, that's really important because we see a lot of clients who are not doing well at pretrial. We see a lot of clients on probation revocation cases where we've seen that if we are able to connect and have resources that can address not only the underlying issue, but have case managers who can work with the clients throughout the process, that the success rates will be better. And that's where we have seen, personally, my team as well, where we have been successful in getting clients into housing, into substance use treatment, and away from the criminal system. We have also been successful at reunifying clients with family members, which has been a huge step, especially youth and adolescents in the system.
So that all sounds awesome and important, and necessary, but how do you, and this maybe goes beyond your pay grade, right? But how do you scale that across a state that's so big where there's only, 70 counties that have access to public defenders?
I think that's a great question and one that we all are struggling with as we're talking about this. But I think it starts at discussions and in rooms like these where we are not forgetting the rural counties, where we are not forgetting the counties where we don't even have adequate attorneys, let alone holistic teams, right? But it has to start somewhere. And I know that There are counties that have now started hiring case managers. Another piece of the puzzle is to just as simple as pick up the phone and start interacting and networking with other peer-to-peer consultations. That's something I had done in offices where we didn't have resources, was to reach out to the Bronx Defenders, to reach out to TIDC. And last year when we reached out to TIDC, we have started now what we call the Texas Defense Social Service Network, which allows for social service providers from all around the state of Texas to come together and network, share resources. And I think I'm very hopeful that these small steps can take and help us in expanding the model beyond just Harris County or urban cities.
And, Rocky, I'm sure technology plays a role in this. And I guess I would pose kind of a similar question, like there are some rural counties, I won't name them, but that, still make me like send in snail mail records requests, So, I mean, we're talking about some counties that like technology is, very bare minimum. So what does that look like?
I think that when you're talking about technology, you want to look at it from the perspective of not like what technology is out there that we can buy and use and or get the counties to use. It's how can we change our system and customize it in such a way that we can connect with different channels of communications. So it's and that's kind of like what my office is kind of focused on, is less like, okay, well, like, who do we buy from, like what program works, right? It's like technology has reached a point now where we're able to build our own custom solutions without having to know how to code, without having to know how to, we've reached that kind of inflection point, so that all it takes is the subject matter expertise and knowing what changes need to be done, and then we can build that so that we can then bridge that gap. So if there's that jurisdiction that it's difficult to communicate with, we can say, okay, here's how it's done. Here's the way that we fix that, because we know what the problem is. We don't have to hire someone to fix it for us. We fix it ourselves.
And how would that work in communities that are more rural? I mean, who is the person that's saying like, hey, there's this technology out here, we can just start using it, we don't need to code it?
One of the beautiful things about the way that current development cycles, the way that technology, I guess, the way that coders work, the way that they think, is that it's not I'm going to build a proprietary solution to something and only I can use it, which is kind of the way the business world thinks, right? But in technology, it's like, okay, so let's find a solution and then everybody's going to use it. It's like, here's the way that we find the date, right? And then it's like this library that you use, and then everybody's code uses that library because that solution's been found. And I think that these discoveries of, okay, this worked in my jurisdiction, we need to think the same way. We need to say, okay, well, here's the model for how this was solved. Let's share it across all jurisdictions, so that, yeah, we figured this out in Bexar County, but let's see how this works in Taylor County. Let's see how this works in Lubbock County. Let's see how it works in Potter County, right? And those are all larger jurisdictions, but even amongst the rural, but Bailey County, or, because it can happen, and it can be, once that idea has been found, once that candle's been lit, it can be shared without, right? And so that's the goal. That's how you reach scalability.
And when we talked earlier this week, you mentioned GPT. Can you talk a little bit about how that can help, especially in communities that don't have the same resources as a Harris County or a Bexar County? Or
I think when you talk about what the lack of resources, the lack of allocation of resources, we don't have enough attorneys, we don't have enough manpower, we don't have the ability to do it, it takes too long. You're talking about that resource allocation, that the economic problem of we just don't have enough to focus, we don't have enough capital, focused capital or actual capital, to address this issue. And so the thing that technology does, the great democratization ability of technology, is that it can look at these problems and say, you know what, there's a quicker way to do it. There's a more efficient way to do it. Rather than having a full-time employee sit down and do it, by hand, we can replace that with an algorithm. We can replace that with decision logic that runs and goes 24/7, that doesn't have to be in the office, right? And so this can happen instantaneously instead of having to wait till somebody shows up in the office and then receives an email and then, does something in response to it. And then hours later, something happens, right? That happens instantaneously. So that efficiency that's gained, there's the MIT study that came out at the end of the year, end of 2022, that said that something like 50 to 80% of the wage inequality that happened since the year 1980, I think it was, something like, I don't know if I'm mixing the 1980 and the 80%, but it was a gigantic proportion of the wage inequality that happened since the year 1980 was as a result of automation, businesses using automation, and then that putting pressure on wage earners because they were losing jobs where automation was taking over, and those businesses becoming more efficient made more profits. So in indigent defense, we're not interested in making profits, but we're interested in that inefficiency or that efficiency, making our systems more efficient so that we can better allocate our resources towards investigation or towards mitigation or towards, having those kind of personal connections that we couldn't do before because we were so overworked. And so I've found in my mission and what we're trying to do is just chip away at those little processes that how can I replace a process that takes a full-time employee half the day every single morning with a script that takes less than 2 seconds to run, and then how do we reallocate that efficiency towards a better use?
Are there any pitfalls with that? When we were talking earlier this week and you mentioned GPT, my poor little anal retentive heart was like, but what about the fact checking? What about the fact checking?
Yeah.
So what are the pitfalls and how do you deal with those?
Thank you for subtly reminding me too that I didn't answer the first question. That's a great point. And I think that there's a lot of, GPT is just an example of something that is incredible. And exactly to your point, it's something that is so good at something that we have to explore the possibilities because we're looking for that gain in efficiency, right? Now, obviously, there are there's a lot of issues with GPT, that we need to be very careful, not the least of which is the biases that are, can come out of how generative, work, that whole process. I don't want to go into the weeds on that, but there's ethical issues there, but there's also like privacy issues. So if I'm running a query and I'm putting information into it, like a police report, and I want to summarize a police report, or I want to pull data out of it or specific tags out of it, I'm having to put in somebody's confidential information into a system that's querying out to a third party that can then be subpoenaed potentially. And so I have to so we have to be very careful as to how we approach it. But the gains are so significant that if we just say, oh, well, it could probably, it's scary, right? We can't do that. Like, as indigent defenders, like, we don't have the privilege of saying we shouldn't try. We shouldn't explore that. We shouldn't invest in trying to like figure out like, okay, where can we make a lot of change here?
Do you think that is a situation where you might want to like have, maybe not at the state level, but at the county level, have like sort of measures and parameters put into place as we kind of like bring more sort of, we're talking about AI, right? Bring more AI into the fold here.
Yeah. And that's one of the really fun things about the job, right? Is that we get to explore that. We get to say, okay, well, we need to have guardrails. We need to figure out like, because just as much as this represents something that can increase the efficiency of how we deal with our cases and how we can better meet the needs of our clients, the same goes for the state. This is that same technology is how they're going to view what our clients are doing, and they're going to sentence our clients based on their actions. They're not going to actually look at it anymore, right? So if we're not digging into it, if we're not figuring out what those guardrails are and what those problems are, we're not able to respond when they do it to our clients. So we it's a double-edged sword always.
Mhm. And Anna, can you talk a little bit about how, sort of what our previous two speakers talk about how that plays a role in death penalty cases?
Well, I think like he was saying earlier, it's one of those things that you can't be afraid to try something. And so when we're dealing with trying to save somebody's lives at our PDO, we work really hard to do everything we can, regardless of whether or not it's uncharted territory and maybe something that nobody else in the defense community has done. We've gone and subpoenaed records from medical examiners' offices and, having to do with death cases that went on years before to show inconsistencies in a way that MEs do some of their work. I mean, we've had to really step out and do everything because we're trying to save someone's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, he was talking about the holistic approach earlier. In Texas, we have the statute that mandates what makes up a capital defense team. And so we do have the mitigation specialists and investigators and 2 attorneys on every case. And so we use those more for the purpose of making sure that we are able to get to the DA with some information that might make them back off the death penalty in an effort to save our clients' lives. And a lot of times we're able to use those resources that we go out into the community and gain, or by doing the family mitigation and the social history to put together a package to try to convince the DA to waive the death penalty. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So at that point, we have to use other resources. We have to have a really vigorous pretrial motion strategy, if you will, and get them into court and really call them on the carpet on stuff and fight those good fights. But we have to use everything that they've talked about here to do that.
Mm-hmm. So what about in rural counties? I imagine that's much more complicated.
It is very complicated. We've had other presentations talking about rural counties, and some of them just do things so differently. And with our PDO, we only service the rural counties. So many of them are not used to anybody coming into their territory, if you will. They have their wheel and their attorneys that the judges, go play golf with or play poker with on Tuesday nights or whatever. And those are the attorneys they're used to dealing with. They're very, many of them are very reverent to the DA's office, if you will. And so the DAs usually do not like to deal with us in the rural counties either. And I think Mr. McDermott was talking about threats earlier. I'm actually one of those attorneys that has been incarcerated and indicted in a rural county in Texas for my work as a public defender. So it's just a whole different world in the rural areas. You're talking about snail mail. We literally are driving 4 or 5 hours sometimes to get things on file or to get a copy from the file in some of these places because of they don't evolve like the rest of the state does, if you will.
So how would, kind of going back to what Rocky was talking about, how would technology help you guys with that? Maybe it wouldn't, but.
So, we have to use technology. We have our case management system is all online, and it's, we have 5 offices across the state. And so we have a system that we have to log into. And when we're in these counties, it's really difficult for us, but we're able to, even if we have to do it by hotspot, be able to communicate with our other office or our home office to get things that we may need to show our client in the jail. But it's always a struggle because you have to have the sheriff agree to let you use either their internet or take a hotspot in, and it's always a struggle, but we have to use it to be able to show our clients discovery. We have to be able to file things appropriately and quickly and actually gather things from the file that they have in the clerk's office. And so it's a part of everything we do.
Mm-hmm. What are you doing? If you can do anything to sort of work with courts to bring them more up to date so that you don't have to be like, can I please bring my hotspot in, or like sneak your phone in so you can,
So actually, and it's the silliest thing, and I think, people that don't necessarily do capital defense may or may not really get this, but, the volume of our files are so tremendous. I mean, I'm not a computer person to tell you terabytes, whatever, but it takes up a lot of space. And so what we try to do initially when we first get a case is we start filing motions about it, and we ask them to do something as simple as bait stamping. And some of these rural counties have a difficult time doing that because their system's not put in place to do that. So we have to ask them to get a system that will bait stamp so that we know that we're receiving every single piece of discovery that our client's entitled to have. And so we start with pretrial motions, and we file motions and ask the court for these, one-on-one contact with our client so that we can show him discovery via computer. Whatever it is that we need, we start filing motions immediately to try to make it happen.
How does that go for you?
Most of the time, they don't like change. But most of the time, when you start throwing the Constitution in there and arguing about, they're trying to kill our client, this isn't a DWI case. They want to kill our client, and all of these constitutional rights protect him, and you're obligated to gatekeep those constitutional rights. They kind of have to listen, and most of the time they become more receptive. Everything is usually a fight, but we usually get there with those types of things.
And so, Nora, can you talk a little bit about Padilla, what it is, why it's important?
Sure. So Padilla advice is kind of like the nickname that we use to call the constitutional requirement that criminal defense attorneys have to inform their non-US citizen clients about the immigration consequences of pleading to a criminal offense. It is named after a Supreme Court case called Padilla versus Kentucky. And, courts have the reasoning behind this is everyone, regardless of their immigration status, have a right to effective assistance of competent counsel. And due to the unique nature of deportation, it is, intimately related to criminal proceedings, and therefore, a blanket advice where a criminal defense attorney might tell a client, well, you might be deported is not enough. And then Padilla, what it requires really is that counsel provides accurate legal advice about the truly clear consequences of pleading to a criminal offense. And courts have, and to the question about like why it is important, courts have reflected on how immigration law has changed to a lot through the years. There was a time where courts had more leeway in balancing whether deportation was a proportionate act. And right now we just have a huge list of criminal offenses that lead to automatic deportation. And because, every day courts have less leeway on this balancing and deciding a case by case scenario, it is becoming more and more important to have accurate legal advice on what is going to happen to a person if they plead guilty to a criminal offense. And it is worth mentioning that this is not about representation in immigration proceedings, right? Like we are talking about the criminal case. Like this is a part of the Sixth Amendment. It's a constitutional obligation, and we don't, part of trying to bring it to this table and kind of like integrating it to a holistic public defense model is to just not make it something apart that is not relevant, but part of that right of access to counsel. So in different words, let me phrase it differently. If a criminal defense attorney does not provide Padilla advice to a client that is not a US citizen, they are violating the Sixth Amendment of the Constitution. So yeah, that is in a nutshell.
So to clear this up, we're not talking about like undocumented immigrants. These are individuals who maybe have a green card or something like that, where they've been charged with a crime, and the outcome could impact their status in the United States, right?
So yeah, I think there is a common misunderstanding that when we talk about people who are not U.S. citizens, we're only referring to undocumented people, and the truth is much more complicated than that. Non-U.S. citizens is a broad category of people that includes, long-term permanent residents, visa holders, refugees, victims of trafficking, victims of crimes. Among others, these people are fathers, teachers, doctors, like everywhere. And even if you find it hard to believe, there are people who are US citizens. They just don't know they are US citizens. And I don't know if you have ever had the pleasure of reading the Immigration and Nationality Act, and I don't recommend it for a Sunday reading, but skimming through it, you would understand why people get lost in the labyrinth. So, to answer your question, yes, it's not only undocumented people, and actually the case, Padilla versus Kentucky, it was Mr. Padilla was a lawful permanent resident of the United States for more than 40 years, and the attorney told him, no, you're good, you're not gonna be deported, you have been here forever, and turned out it wasn't the truth. So yeah, it is much complicated than that.
So how do you make sure that, that part of the Sixth Amendment is upheld? I mean, what is I don't want to say policing policy, but kind of, right? Like, how do you make sure that attorneys are informing their clients how this might impact their status?
Right. And I do want to say, like, I think this is also that might be stressful for criminal defense attorneys. I mean, even immigration attorneys have a hard time knowing the answers to everything, let alone someone who's doing, like representing someone in a criminal case has to know everything that happens in immigration law. Is just, I don't know, it's not really doable. So for that, we have a project that provides free legal immigration, Padilla advice to criminal defense attorneys appointed and public defenders throughout the state of Texas. Its name, it is very difficult, so write it down or just kind of like pay a lot of attention. Are you ready? It's called My Padilla. So we have our website, mypadilla.com, and any appointed criminal defense attorney in any corner of the state, they can log in, create an account, submit an intake. Everything, of course, is protected by confidentiality. It has, like 3 parts. 2 of them, the criminal defense attorney already has, all the information, the cause number, all of that, criminal history. And then the last part you can print and bring to the jail and talk to your client about, their immigration history, their family members, everything that is relevant to kind of like understand what is going to happen to their situation if they were to be convicted, of if they were going to plead guilty, if they were going to take the offer that the district attorney is offering. Something that we also do is that we visit, places all around Texas. We have been talking to public defenders' offices. We have been giving CLEs to local bar associations. And it's been great because to me, it is clear that once people understand that this is not a favor, this is not charity, it is a constitutional obligation, and everyone involved in the criminal legal system has an interest on this, right? Because on one side, the criminal defense attorneys, they have, an obligation as an attorney, but also judges and district attorneys have an interest that, the outcomes don't get reversed, right? So once people understand why it is so important, have found it very easy for people to kind of just like participate, refer, ask questions, call me. People send me emails, all the time. And yeah, I think it's just a matter of, passing along the message.
Are there any steps individuals can take if they feel like their attorney isn't quite following this, or on the flip side, if their attorney, tells them like it's fine, you're fine, and they're definitely not fine?
Yeah, well, clients can always, it's hard though, right? Because I feel like it is not very clear that criminal defense attorneys, or a lot of people don't have the clarity that criminal defense attorneys should do this. But definitely, as a client who has an appointed attorney or a criminal defense attorney in general, you can advocate for them to speak to an immigration attorney, right? And especially if you have a free resource for appointed attorneys and public defenders, I think it's, a matter of, hey, pushing back, just can you consult, can you make sure this is happening, and the way it works is I just send the attorney a memo, and that memo is for the client can read it and do whatever they want with it, so just making sure that someone is actually looking over the case.
Are there any, I'm thinking about, I'm familiar with the Harris County Jail, so we'll just use that, right? There are, kind of signs posted like, are you experiencing a mental health crisis? This is who you can talk to. Like, does your organization have anything like that in jails so that, people know like where to even go if they feel like their rights aren't being upheld?
Yeah. No, and that would be definitely something that would be helpful, so people would know to advocate that with their own attorneys. And that's the thing, right? Because big counties, they usually have their own in-house Padilla attorney, right? But that is what, 7 counties plus 14 that are represented by TRALA that have their own, and we have what, 256 counties in the state, so that leaves like thousands of people outside of, an in-house research. So yeah, I would agree that that would be a good way to pass along the message, about the services that we provide.
So I want to kind of open this up to everyone. So Jeff mentioned this at the beginning, but the Sixth Amendment Center came out with this report, right? That Texas is ranked 46 in the country for spending on, public defender services. Given that spending is so low, how do we ensure that all these things that we've talked about today are actually happening and are possible and accessible to Texans like across the state, not just in the big cities? Anybody can start.
So I'll just start with that. One is to better understand what the resources are that is needed by an office, because sometimes offices themselves, like leadership or whoever they may be hiring, for example, like clinical social workers only, when you may need a host of different resources, which might be a little bit more economically advantageous, like peer navigators, peer specialists. So just knowing what the resources are needed for and targeting it appropriately is one thing. Two, I think it would be great to have like innovation hubs. So like central offices that do have or have started the process and gearing them and connecting them with other offices, like whether that be in the rural areas or in other suburban areas, and so that they can share information, knowledge, experience, which would be really helpful to make the most out of the limited resources we have. And I think another thing is understanding that this is not a responsibility of one agency. It takes a community, a village, because of the intersectionality of the issues that our clients are suffering from. It's not only the public defense spending, but also the community resources that are being spent on, and what does that look like? So that's a collaboration that is super critical in making sure that we take the most out of the limited resources we have, at least for holistic defense piece I can talk about.
I can say that, I think the model that my Padilla presents is great in that sense, because there might be counties where it is not really the best use of resources to bring an attorney to do only immigration because of the volume, because, the demographics, whatever. So, using these remote tools to kind of provide this one service to a lot of offices, I think it's a very good way to make the, what, using the few resources that we have to have the more impact all across the state.
I love the fact that Texas is so far behind, because it makes the argument so easy. When the parity is so off, it's like you're spending $10 million here and $100,000 here, triple us, and you're still, but the reason, one of the main reasons I really like that is because, and I love the example you used earlier about the bait stamping and how like it's very difficult to get like a rural jurisdiction to with the bait stamping, right? And so a lot of what I do, and one of the things that I really was one of my favorite techniques, right, is to say, okay, well, I'll build that for you, right? Like very easy. Like, which as soon as you said, I was like, oh, okay. I just immediately coded that in my head. Like, it's so easy to just like, bait stamp the folders, right? And just put together a little program that they can use. And I just saved you, I just saved you a full-time employee in your office that you're paying this much money. So now reallocate that over here to us, right? And so we've literally did that like last week, right? With we wrote a script that very very simple small things, right? But that they take the time of the full-time employees at the court admin, and you can very easily just find that system, say, hey, we can automate that, we can write a script that does that. Here it is now. We just saved you literally half a day every day. So that's where I think there can be a lot of that resetting of the allocation of the resources.
And I think just by the very nature of the way our office functions, it's helpful, I guess, to lessen some of the burden for the county, because our team basically is funded partially by the county and partially by TIDC. But our team and all the travel expenses and we have to travel a lot because we're going to rural counties. The county doesn't have to pay attorney's fees, and they don't have to deal with the fact that they probably don't have any death qualified lawyers in their jurisdiction. And so I think it lightens the load for them a little bit. But of course, there's always more that needs to be done in the area of indigent defense. So
What, this is we're talking about innovations, right? So what are all of you guys kind of looking forward to in the future that you see on the horizon in terms of I can never say this word, indigent defense? And do you think those are things that can be implemented in Texas, where, state funding is essentially nothing, right? And it's on all of these individual counties, so many of them, to kind of apply all these things on their own.
I think that there's so much momentum right now. I'm really excited about the momentum that exists right now. Students coming out of law school, and they're like really interested in indigent. It is a very
Hard
I've
word.
done this work for long enough that I should be able to say it. And I always trip over my tongue also. But it's there's so much momentum. The climate has just changed, and people really want to do this work now. And I'm really excited. The thing that really excites me is trying to get criminal defense attorneys, indigent defenders interested in data, and how that new area of I think it's a new field, not field, but it's a new area of focus for criminal defense. And I think that a lot of people are realizing like how much can be done there, that chipping away, even at the small things, at the misdemeanor level, small processes, and you chip away at, and you're under a castle of sand, just a couple of grains underneath, and all of a sudden the whole thing, well, huge changes can happen. And so empowering these younger kids coming out of law school who have a little bit more of experience with data, or with data science, or pro coding, or to look at indigent defense and be like, oh wow, there's so much green pasture of things that could be changed, that I can marry these two, my belief in indigent defense, and then my knowledge, my data knowledge. I can marry the two and do some incredible things. That's what really excites me.
And I think for me in the capital arena, I think what I would love to see in the future would be some sort of legislation that would require the DA to maybe have a panel of people to discuss what cases they should actually seek the death penalty on. I mean, I'm with Mr. Graves. I think we're a killing state and we shouldn't be doing it the way that we do it in Texas. But if there was something that I could hope for, that I really could see happening, it would be that there would be a panel of people that would decide whether or not a case actually should be one where the state is seeking the death penalty, because a lot of the rural areas, they use the death penalty as a hammer on cases that are overcharged. That really shouldn't be a case where death is sought. So that would be what I would like to see in the future.
And I am looking forward to keep growing my Padilla. Last year, we provided, more than 500 advisals. We covered more than 51 counties, but we have a long road, right? And shout out to Krista Harvey that is out here, and she used to run my Padilla. Now she's a criminal defense attorney. But it's been, it's hard to reach out. So, tell your friends, your colleagues, share our posts. We're really, really looking forward to keep growing this and updating our websites and everything to, keep connecting criminal defense attorneys with immigration attorneys so they can meet their obligations.
And for me, I would say, like, because of the model of representation which holistic defense allows us to do, I think that prevention and diversion, so to prevent clients from even being involved in the criminal legal system, is something which is really important and innovative, and something that I'm really looking forward to through our practices. And that is done by understanding the community that we work with, and that's really important. And the other thing is those who are already impacted by the legal system, how do we divert them out from the jails, from this punitive system that we have, and bring them to a place where, because these are human lives that we're talking about, and the clients that I see are very much part of the same community that I am, and especially in the misdemeanor cases that we are looking at. And so I'm really excited about how, when we talk about innovation, it can be as simple as just learning resources. It could be as simple as working in a team in a collaborative manner. It could be as simple as listening to your client throughout the whole process. And I think just those simple innovations are something that I'm also very excited about, as much as I am for the other things, such as we're talking about technology and other aspects.
Okay. Well, I think we're about out of time. So thank you guys so much for sharing all these thoughts. I got a lot of story ideas, so I appreciate it. But thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you all so much for being here. We want to thank the Texas Tribune for broadcasting this and for moderating. We want to thank Representative Reggie Smith for sponsoring this event and allowing us to hold it here at the Capitol. Thank you all for being here, both in person and at home. We really appreciate it. We think Gideon Day is something absolutely worth celebrating. Safeguarding the lives and liberty of our clients is something that it's worth taking the time out to celebrate. So thank you all again. Have a happy Gideon Day. Thank you.